Okay, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and get started. All right, I'm gonna put the microphone down, but I wanna make sure I got your attention.
Okay, thank you all tonight again for your participation in Durham City County Neighborhood College. I have a series of questions that our audience would like to ask of you, and so, okay, all right, so I'm going to speak louder, and so everyone can hear me. And in fact, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna include the microphone, I'm gonna let you all pass it between you all, just to make sure we don't have any audio issues. Okay, so tonight, this is an interesting question, because I get public records questions for the county, and I often get this question that comes up. If there's a violation on a rental property, who is the recipient of the notice is it the tenant or the owner?
Our ordinance allows us to issue the notice of violation to both the tenant, the owner, the manager of the property if it's a rental property. But ultimately the responsibility of, if it gets to a citation, falls on the owner of the property. So we are allowed to cite everybody as far as the notice of violation. In my dealings, we do a lot of digging to make sure we know who the rental property owner is. We make sure if we can get who the tenant is, we find out who the tenant is. We definitely send it to the owner, whether that be in town or out of state. But we do issue the notice of violation to all three, maybe both of them. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the owner of the property is the one who ultimately is responsible for the citation.
Tell me, with all the growth that we're having downtown and around Durham, what has been the biggest challenge for your departments?
So our goal downtown is actually to have the high density, but the high density downtown tends to lead to very expensive. And that has been a big issue, is how to keep people able to live all across Durham and not just get pushed farther and farther away. Downtown is very restrictive in how it can be designed. There's a specific set of guidelines for the buildings in the downtown district, and so that can push the cost up just a little bit also, so that feeds into it. But we're trying to get a downtown feel, a walkable feel, and so that has been, balancing those two is a bit of a challenge.
Anything to add, Peri?
Specifically downtown, the county is not really responsible for the issuance of, let's say, permits and things like that in the downtown core. But in terms of growth as a whole for Durham, I think the biggest challenge is us maintaining the appropriate staffing levels to keep up with the amount of permits and things that we're seeing coming in to Durham. I think respectively they said, 18 people are moving into Durham every day or something like that. And so with that, it puts a considerable strain on staffing in terms of trying to keep up with that growth. I think it impacts everything from our DSS departments, to our public health departments. It's just a broad, a variety of, I guess, social impacts that, is created from that. So that's what I had.
Well, this is an interesting follow-up to your question about being able to keep up your staff to be able to serve the community at its rapid growth. In your conversation earlier, you talked about the commissioners trying to push for hiring people that don't necessarily have advanced degrees. Share with us what type of skills, training, education does someone need to work, and you can start with your department because you spoke about your needs, and if you all would like to answer as well.
Sure. Well, again, engineering has basically 6 divisions, and for project management, we typically look for someone with an architectural, engineering, landscape architecture, one of those types of architecture engineering disciplines, for that job. As far as sustainability, obviously, you're looking for someone with a sustainability background. You know, I know there's new college offerings, you know, around that, so that would be for that. Open space and real estate, you got two areas there. One, you really don't need an advanced degree per se to maintain the open spaces and trails that we have. But as far as the real estate piece of it, we're looking for someone with, you know, some type of real estate background. You know, that's very helpful because not only do they maintain the open space and trails, they also assist project management with looking for properties to acquire, i.e., let's say for a EMS station. You know, they need to go out and shop around and see what's available, you know, in the specific areas that we're trying to target. I'll give you another example of something that we're gonna be faced with here shortly. When we do the 300 and 500 block parking lot, we're gonna displace parking on the 300 block first. And so I've charged our open space and real estate group with looking at potential parking locations where we could potentially do some type of shuttling or satellite location to where we're gonna have to bus staff in, you know, doing that construction. So they're also charged with doing, you know, that type of work. As far as sedimentation, erosion control, again, you're looking for someone with some stormwater, some maybe landscape architect background, civil engineering, something like that. And so that's particularly what, you know, the engineering department consists of. The utilities group, you know, they have all different grade 1 through 5 level certifications, you know, for wastewater treatment. And so that's something that, you know, folks could certainly take advantage of. I know maybe like Durham Tech and other community colleges and things like that would offer those type programs. And so that's basically the kind of variety of educational requirements that we have.
Would you all be about the same, or do you all have some very specific degrees or certifications they did?
A lot of planning background, public administration. My division, my CEOs, my code enforcement officers, the minimum is a high school diploma. But throughout the planning department, it's mostly bachelor's degrees or advanced degrees. Certifications, all of my CEOs, my code enforcement officers are required to become certified zoning officials. Not necessarily when you apply, but within a certain amount of time.
Planning is the most common, but it depends on what section of the department you're in. The long range is gonna have a lot more planning degrees and urban development, that sort of higher end planning degree. My end, it's a lot of reviewing plans and plats, and if you know how to read a site plan, a landscape architect can do that as well as a planner. So as long as you have a familiarity and a degree, then you can, in my end, have a little more flexibility, but planning's the most common.
I'll let you keep going. Let's go back to zoning, to those conversations with zoning. What zoning rules can be determined at the city-county level, and what zoning rules are determined more so at the state or some other level in government?
I'd have to say most zoning ordinances are done on the city or county level. It's not really state level. They come up with legislation that we eventually have to enforce or create ordinances to enforce. So I would say it's not really that they're creating ordinances, they're creating regulations or legislation that forces us to create ordinances to abide by their legislation, if that makes.
They're giving the direction on what we can and cannot regulate, more than telling us how to do it.
Can you give an example?
So we are not allowed to regulate the appearance of buildings and subdivisions, and that has been a recent, the last 5 or 6 years change. That used to be something that local governments could regulate, and now we do not. We can regulate things around that, but not how a building looks in a residential, single-family home.
Our current sign ordinance, we're currently in the process of rewriting our sign ordinance because the state court system basically said that we cannot regulate what a sign says. So now we're changing our ordinance to basically regulate time, duration, size. So we're having to adapt our ordinance now to meet what the state requires a sign, especially signs located in the right of way.
Did you have anything to say here? Okay, so there were several questions about the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO. And so, the questions that came up a couple times were about the zoning, or the decisions made about the type of houses that can be built, like the tiny houses, the conversations about, those. This question says, how does the newly adopted, so I'm thinking that's what they're referring to, ordinance impact what the planning department does? So, do you have any statements about probably anything related to those conversations that recently happened?
The EHC regulations that were just passed for expanded housing choices are city only. They haven't been adopted by the county, so within the city limits. They do regulate a little less. They give more opportunities for smaller homes in more locations, and where in some zonings you would need a larger amount of square footage would be the minimum lot size. This will allow for a smaller lot, and it helps with ADUs in the back. Another dwelling unit in the rear can be, that changes the size requirements for that too. So they're very new, and we haven't had a lot of experience on how those are how well they roll out and what we may need to tweak a little bit, but it should offer a lot more affordable housing options for people, we're hoping.
That's all planned.
Okay, great. So there's a question here about engineering environmental services. The question is, how is it determined, or why is your department with the county versus with the city?
Again, both the city and county are two separate organizations. And so we administer, are responsible for everything within the county, which is basically outside of the city limits. And so that is that's basically the separation there. And so it's just basically that simple.
We get a lot of questions about historically how city-county planning, city-county inspections, city-county GIS, we get a lot of those types of questions, and I'm not talking about in this class, but in general. When people call us with different questions, they want to know why is that, and quite frequently, well, not frequently, but every once in a while they come up some type of review and conversations about why those things happen, why those departments are combined. So I'm curious, I'm not sure if that person, if some of those questions kind of came from that train of thought.
Sure.
Let's talk about the comprehensive plan. I know in a few moments we're going to talk more about Engage Durham with our guests next. But the question is, can you explain what the comprehensive plan is and give some concrete examples of how it affects an ordinary person's everyday life?
So the idea of a comprehensive plan is that it guides how we're gonna develop in Durham. And if it's written well, then you have anticipated where people will be going. You've anticipated what will need to be there when they develop. So you take your water lines to a location where lots of large subdivisions are going to be located. And where you think that businesses will be wanting to locate, you'll have the infrastructure in place there. So you're planning out growth so that you can do it correctly, smartly, not spend a lot of money. If it's not written correctly, it may not guide you as much as it should. It shouldn't just be, there's a dot over here, this is residential. But there's no more information about that. Right now we have a lot of density notation on our comprehensive plan, so it's like 1.2 to 1.4 houses per acre, and then the next will be 1.4 to 1.6, or whatever the density is. It's very specific, they're not whole numbers. It had a good intention, but it's hard to use and it's confusing to people. So there are things like that that at the time it was written were the way that people wrote those. So now there's new thinking on how comprehensive plans should be developed. And what we're hoping to do this time is to have more input on where people really think things are gonna go, because there were some mistakes made. There are water lines that go to places where the development did not take place. There are a lot of places southeast Durham where there is no infrastructure, and that's where everybody has moved. And so there is a lot of catching up and trying to extend utilities there, and that's very, very expensive, and it slows down development, and it can be a big problem. So we're trying to, as I mentioned earlier, encourage development where the infrastructure is and write the comprehensive plan in a way that we all work together to encourage that development to take place. It's not just the planning department. We're getting input from the other departments in the city and the county governments that will help guide some of those plans, so that when we have site plans and development ideas come to us, we can respond appropriately and say, yes, that would work there, or we don't think this is the best place for that because of these reasons. This may be a better place for you. So that's the goal of a comprehensive plan, is that we make good decisions about development in the future.
So in our next part of our conversation, I'm sure with our next presenter, Lisa, you'll have an opportunity to find out how you can get involved in the future with Engage Durham, with the comprehensive plan, and the input that you can provide to where that plan goes. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. Speaking of other departments, there's a question about soil and water for Peri. I know that's not your department, but the person wants to know, how do you interact with soil and water? What is the relationship with your department in soil and water? And they want to know, why aren't they under engineering and environmental services?
Yeah, I guess interestingly, we do have a lot of interaction with soil and water. I know basically soil and water has a lot of programs where they assist farmers with like stream restoration and things like that. And so they partner up with our stormwater and erosion control and sedimentation erosion control group to review those plans and assist those farmers with, I guess, outlining the plans and making the right decisions about how they should, bring those streams back. And so there is a lot of collaboration there. The interesting thing is that, soil and water typically is charged with assisting the farmers, in the county. And I think the biggest hurdle there is the fact that farming is not even considered reviewable, or they don't have to pull land disturbing permits and things like that. They're basically exempt from land disturbing activities. And so that's why they're basically separate. And so, again, like I said, with sedimentation erosion control, anybody developing, in the county, they have to do a plan review, they have to pull a land disturbance permit. But again, farming, being that it's exempt, it's best to keep them separate.
Well, speaking of farmland, the next question pertains to advisory committees. The person referred to Farmland Protection Advisory, City County Plan and Appearance Committee. They want to know more about how the advisory committees work with your departments, both planning and engineering and environmental services. Not necessarily specifically those, but probably you can speak in general about how advisory boards assist you in the decisions that you make.
Engineering does not have, when I say not a lot, there are some, but I guess in the broad spectrum of things, there are not a lot of advisory committees that engineering partners with. I do know, like for example, our open space and real estate division, they do work with open space and trails, and so there is some interaction there. Like I said, soil and water, being separate from engineering, they work directly with the Farmland Advisory Board. And so unless, like I said, unless they run into an issue, that's been brought to their attention that they need some assistance from engineering on figuring out how to address, there's not a lot of cross-pollination there, so to speak. And so I think that may be a question that may be better answered by you guys, I think. They put you on the spot, but we just don't.
I don't deal with a lot of boards, but I know Jessica does.
So we have some boards like the Planning Commission that they advise the city council. They're supposed to be professionals that are aware of planning issues and have training in that. So they make a decision, and then their decision is advisory and passed on to city council to help them make good decisions, because not all city council members are familiar with planning. They get there eventually, for sure. There are some other boards that we deal with, like the Board of Adjustment, that is not advisory. There's DOST, the Open Space and Trails. They actually can review site plans if it's something that they may be concerned with. So there are some advisory boards that are very actively reviewing things that come to us. And their opinion doesn't often come to our group as we're reviewing beyond things that are in the UDO. They can say, per this section, we think they're not meeting this requirement. Or they're advisory, and then the developer can choose to acknowledge that and take that into account in their designs or not. But the ones that advise to the city council have a lot more, not control, but influence in how decisions are made at that level.
Yeah. One thing I did forget to mention, and this is because it's new to the county. Recently, about 2 months ago, the Board of County Commissioners adopted a public art policy for Durham County. And so engineering basically led that effort. Linda Salguero, who's a project manager for us, she basically bird dogged that and followed it through. So I would give her all the credit for working with the city of Durham, Stacy Poston, and a few others on that. But she does have interaction now with the Public Arts Council and the Culture Advisory Board. And that's basically just to review public art that will be going into Durham County projects. And like I said, this is a new process for us. It was just adopted basically 2 months ago. But that's something where we'll start seeing some collaboration and interaction on with that. And basically what happened was we basically mirrored what the city was already doing in terms of public art. It used to be City of Durham public art policy. Now it's just Durham, Public Arts Council. And so, and that's to represent both the county and the city. And so basically what happened is we're gonna share the same processes in terms of selection of artists and mentoring and all of those opportunities, but it's just separate funding sources. So that is something that we're proud of. So I did want to mention that.
That's great. We have some lovely public art right outside of our building.
Absolutely.
And around, and actually, 2 classes ago, the class took a public art tour. And so it was really an interesting tour.
Cool.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. So we have some great questions about campaign signs that we'll pass on to you all. This is actually an interesting time right now this season, so we won't get into that. We'll end, because we're wrapping up for the night, with an interesting question. This person says, it's for a friend. What to do if your neighbor has a rooster?
Okay, honestly, roosters are not allowed within the city limits at all. We do allow for chickens, but we do not allow for roosters at all. What you can do, if you saw the chart, or you can call our Mojo, give the address, and I will have an inspector go out, and if we can trace and find the chicken and the rooster on the property, we will issue a notice of violation, and he will be required to remove the rooster.
I'm from the country, so I vote that we have a class action lawsuit for discrimination against roosters. It sounds like you're all about the hens, my friend.
I would say that a lot of times people get these hens, the chicks, and they don't know it's a rooster.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then once it grows into a rooster, they don't want to just get rid of it. So, they're kind of stuck with a rooster all of a sudden. So,
That's interesting.
Can I, that's my question. This is my life, and I live in the city, and my husband and I just moved into our house about a year ago, and my husband's convinced that somebody will find out that we're the ones that are calling them in, so he's a little afraid of the blowback.
you can definitely submit anonymous, and we will inspect the
But
violation.
he's convinced that they'll be like, well, it was obviously the new kids on the block that don't like the rooster that wakes us up every.
I will say that we're not going to tell them, but
Because I want to be a good neighbor, right?
and I understand that. I tend to say this: if it's a violation, it's a violation. whether you call it in or your neighbor calls it in, it really doesn't matter. They might say, hey, it's probably them, but there's nothing that's gonna say that it is you
Right,
on record.
okay.
That's what I can assure you. As long as you put it in anonymous, there's nothing that's gonna say on record that you called in the chicken complaint.
Okay,
I
thanks.
have one more question, very quickly as we end. You mentioned Mojo a lot. Is it more effective for someone to reach out to Mojo or call one call?
Okay, as far as zoning enforcement is concerned, it's probably better that you call Mojo.
Okay.
I would suggest you call Mojo, because that's gonna send it directly to me. One call, to be honest with you, adds an extra step, because what they're gonna do is they're gonna take it in and then they're gonna send it to our Mojo, so.
Got it.
I
Okay.
would suggest if you have a zoning violation or a zoning complaint, as far as enforcement is concerned, that you go straight to our Mojo ticket process.
That's the case with all other planning questions as well, and we've actually heard there's a little more of a delay. If it goes to one call, it takes sometimes much longer to get to us, so.
And maybe the complexity of the questions as well.
Right, and they may not know who to send it to, so it may bounce around quite a bit before it actually gets to the right person. And our people who answer the Mojo tickets, generally they're dealing with all the departments and know where something should go. It's a little faster.
Well, Jessica, Landus, Peri, thank you all for this opportunity.